60 Minutes Overtime.
This week on 60 Minutes, we report on previously unknown brain injuries suffered by veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. What's remarkable about these injuries is that they were not caused by large blasts from roadside bombs. New research suggests the troops were wounded by repeated low-level blast pressure from their own weapons.
One of those troops was Ryan Larkin, an elite Navy SEAL who joined right out of high school and served in 4 combat deployments before severe depression led him to take his own life.
Ryan was one of the guys that I helped train to go to war, and then we were teammates.
Derek Van Orden was a senior chief in the Navy SEALs with a deployment to Iraq and 2 to Afghanistan.
What's the difference between a good and a great SEAL? It's your attitude. So being able to be cold, wet, hungry, miserable, and still have a great attitude is what separates a good from a great SEAL. I never saw him in a bad mood. I never saw him, dragging his feet. He was always a guy that would stand up, volunteer to do something, do it at a very high level, and be cheery about it.
And Ryan Larkin was a great SEAL.
He was a great SEAL. And Ryan was always on a mission. And Ryan understood that the mission was America. It wasn't Ryan.
Ryan Larkin's missions included 2 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. When he returned, he became an instructor, training special operations troops in urban combat. The work put him next to explosives and automatic gunfire all day, every day.
The amount of explosives that you are exposed to when you're conducting training for urban combat, it's tremendous. In order to gain access to these buildings, sometimes you blow holes in walls or you breach the doors explosively. So it's not like you can breach a door from a mile away.
Larkin had returned from war, sullen and short-fused. His father, Frank Larkin, told us his son's depression grew steadily worse.
He was, became hypervigilant and almost a state of paranoia at times. And then all of a sudden he began to a state of depression where, he just, struggled just to get through the day, just to be able to organize his thoughts.
Frank Larkin is a former Navy SEAL himself. He spent 20 years in the Secret Service, led a Pentagon project to defeat roadside bombs, and finally became Sergeant at Arms for the United States Senate in charge of security. But his toughest mission came in retirement, figuring out what was happening to his son.
And this was so disturbing because here he was, a highly revered and decorated, SEAL operator that suddenly is coming apart at the seams, and we can't figure this out. And he's just struggling, and he's not getting any answers.
By the time Ryan Larkin ended his life in 2017, he was convinced something was wrong with his brain. He had told his family to donate his body to science, and an autopsy revealed microscopic scarring in his brain.
A lot of the injury that he had suffered was in the frontal lobe where your executive functions are, also in the base of the brain that controlled sleep and other hormonal activity. And so as we came to understand his exposure to the weapon systems, the breaching, the IEDs, all this had a compounding effect on his brain health.
And suddenly all of those symptoms that were so confusing made perfect sense to you.
Yes, and now we were getting some answers, that many people don't get. And it lifted a tremendous burden off our shoulders.
When you heard of Ryan's suicide,
Yeah.
you thought what?
Tragedy. But I've had 21 of my friends commit suicide.
21 SEALs?
21. This is an epidemic.
Did someone let Ryan Larkin down?
I think the way that he was treated by his chain of command was shameful. If someone goes from an exceptionally high performer to somebody who is really having very basic issues, it's incumbent upon leadership to acknowledge that and try to figure out what the problem is in a way that is good for the sailor, good for the unit, and good for the country, because those three entities are intertwined.
After Derek Van Orden retired from the SEALs, he was elected to a seat in Congress as a Republican from Wisconsin. He supported legislation last year requiring the Pentagon to do research on blast exposure and modify weapons to take brain safety into account. As the Trump administration seeks to shrink the federal government, the Defense Department this month ended funding for 91 ongoing studies. We asked Van Orden if spending cuts were likely to come for the work on blast exposure, but he told us he doesn't expect any funding issues for what he calls this vital research. As the legislation worked its way through Congress last year, it was named in part for Ryan Larkin.
You always try to find something good out of bad things. If Ryan killing himself is going to lead to us being able to make better decisions about risk mitigation, that's a ray of hope.
In a sense, a profound sense, Ryan gave his life for his fellow SEALs.
That is correct. And that's not forgotten by anybody.